Hi, welcome to another episode of Coding with Noah. My name's Noah, and today we're going to be building a Svelte color picker. So this is the color picker we're going to be building in the series on color pickers, but the only part of the color picker we're going to build today is this part right here. So just the color picker part of the color picker. In the other videos, we'll build the ability to save colors, to edit colors, into favorite colors, and to filter based on those favorites. But if we did it in a huge video, it'd be like 2 or 3 hours long. And I want to try to keep these videos to 30 minutes. So that's what we're going to be building in this series. In this video, to do that, we're going to be using the Svelte Material UI, which is based on Google's Material Design, and we're going to be using blueprint-css, which is a library. It's a grid system CSS library. All right, with all that being said, let's get started. So we're going to do our Svelte digest command to copy the template folder into a folder into Visual Code. I already have that open, but it's just an empty folder. So go ahead and do that. Open the folder you want to put this in Visual Code, and then just do a dot, and that'll copy everything in. And then you do an npm install, and that'll install all the dependencies. And I'll have a link to this in the video, but you want to run this npm install command, which will install the blueprint, CSS, the Sass, and all the Svelte material component libraries that we're going to use in GitHub. So let's copy that. I'm going to clear so you can see it a little better. I'm going to paste that in and hit enter. And that'll paste it all in. So while that's installing, if you go to the Svelte material library on GitHub, they have these instructions right here. And then if you click on the Rollup Config, they have an example with Rollup. And this is where I got the Rollup Config to use the Svelte Material UI library. And notice I had to install this plugin, this post CSS plugin, to compile the Sass. So we're just going to be following those instructions. I did modify it a little bit to upload to GitHub, but that's about it. So we're going to copy this, and I strongly recommend copying this. I'll have this on my on the GitHub page and on my website. I don't think I'll put this in the YouTube description because it won't come out nice, but you will have access to it. So if you go to your rollup config, you select everything, you delete it and paste that in. That should be good. The next step is to create the theme folder. So we're going to do that. And we're going to do theme. And then if we look back at our instructions, you'll see we have to create this file and put that into the theme folder. And if you look at the example, where's the example? I think it's right here. You can see, there's a theme folder and then an empty Sass file. So let's go ahead and do that. New file, paste that in, and we're good. And then if you look at the rollup.config, you can see it references that theme file right there, which is really cool. Okay, so we've got that. Our next step is to copy the fonts into the HTML. So let's do that. So if we go back to the Svelte Material GitHub page, we can see there's a bunch of fonts, and these fonts are going to be downloaded from Google. And we also have the material icons as well, which will give us the little icons like the trash can and whatnot. So we'll go to the public index.html page, and we'll paste these in. I'm going to paste them right before the icon. It doesn't really matter where you paste them. You do want them above the CSS so they don't override anything. Okay, so we got that. And so the next step is we need to import blueprint-css, which is our grid library. The way you do that in Svelte is you'll go to the source main.js file, and you'll just import it like you would a JavaScript file. So we'll import blueprint-css, this blueprint min.css. So That's just found right here, just to let you know. Give me 1 second. I got to find the blueprint, this, and then you can see the min.css. So if I were to increase this, you could see it right there. So that'll just import it in. And the reason that that works is that if you look at our rollup config, we're now emitting the CSS, whereas before we were not. So see right here, this emit CSS. That's why we're able to import it. Okay. So with all that being said, we've got our fonts, we've got everything in. We need to delete the global CSS file. Not delete the global CSS, but basically make it empty and delete everything in the app.svelte file. And I also forgot to do this as well. Since you're here, go to the index.html file and change the title to color picker or whatever you want. I'm going to change mine to color picker. Okay. So yeah, let's do that. So we're going to delete everything in here. And also go to your main.js. You don't need to pass any props in to the app component because we don't need any props passed in, so you can delete that as well. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to import a button from the Svelte Material UI library and make sure that's working, just to make sure everything's working. So I'm going to import button, and yeah, just make sure it's working. So go here, we'll create a script tag, we'll import the button, make this a little smaller so you can see it, and then we'll just copy one of these buttons. And then we'll run npm run dev. See what that does. Okay, localhost 5000. Looking good. Just a button. It's showing up. So what we want to do too is we want to go to our build, our bundle.css, and you can see blueprint is there. So that's good. And you can see the Svelte button library is there as well. So that's good. So it looks like everything is working. So we just wanted to do that to confirm that everything works. And we'll move this guy over here so that we can start working on it. All right. So the next thing we need to do is create our slider components for this. But before we do that, I forgot a step. I'm going to add this to the README. We need to create our container components. So even though we're not going to be building the whole thing, we're going to build out our components anyway, just so that later on we can adjust. Actually, we won't. Screw that. We're just going to put everything into the app component, but we will create one component which is called the slider component. So we'll wrap the slider Svelte's Material UI slider into its own component. And one thing to note about this library, it is in beta, so not everything's documented. So if you go to slider component and you look at the slider.svelte file, you can see all the props it's passing. So this is where I get all the props. So if it's not in the docs, you can just look at the code, which isn't great, but it is something. So that's just something to note with this library. You will wind up looking a little bit at the code when you're using it. Okay, so with all that being said, let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a container. So I'm going to give it a class of container, not container, but color control. And color, let me see if I can type color controls. And the job of this container or div is to contain the sliders. And we're also going to create a slider component. So I'm going to do that right now. So slider.svelte. And we're going to create a script tag. And we're going to import our slider.swelts in there. So import slider from slider.svelte. And this isn't the material UI, this is just our slider component. And I shouldn't have saved because it auto formats. Okay, so now we're going to need 3 slider components, each of them representing red, green, and blue. So we're going to say slider slash slider slash, you can just copy and paste. You don't have to type this in like me. And that's good. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our slider component. So this way we can see it, so it'll start appearing. So we're going to have to use our grid, blueprint CSS grid, because we want a grid system. So the way it starts out is you create a grid, which is basically like a row. And then in that row, I'm going to create another div, and I'm going to say BP10. So that means that it'll take up 10 spaces. There's 12 by default. And I want it to start at the second space. So I'm going to offset to 2. And then I'm going to put my slider in there. So to do that, I'm going to need to import the slider. So I'm going to need a script tag. So I'm going to import this from the material UI library. So import slider from at smui, Svelte material UI slider. And then I'm going to say slider. And let's save that. And we have our sliders, which is good. But we want to style them. I mean, these look fine, but we do want to style them. And we want to do a bunch of things. So first thing that we want to do is we want the slider component to receive some props. We're going to default some. So we're going to create a min prop, which will start at 0. We're going to create a max prop, which will set it to 255. And we'll import that in. And if we go back here, you can see that the slider component has a min and a max. It's not documented, but that's basically the maximum value the slider will provide and the minimum value the slider will provide. So let's go back here. We want a color value, which will basically be the value that is bound to this value, the value of the slider. And we want a background color. So we want to control, we don't want it to be this cool green, we want it to be our own color. So I'm going to set that equal to coral. Okay. So we've defaulted everything, and let's add it into our component. So because both the variable name and the prop name is min, we can just do it like this. So this is basically a shortcode for this, but if I save, it'll just auto format to that. I'm going to do the same thing for max. So that's the min and max. I'm going to bind value. So we'll bind the color value to the value of the slider. And then this one's a little tricky, right? So we want to change the background color of this, but this is controlled by a CSS variable. So if I inspect this element, we'll see if I can get it. Okay, yeah, right here. You can see this var. Let me move this up a little bit so you can see it if it lets me. No, I got to move this up. Then I got to move this up. Okay, yeah. So, but you can see this var MDC theme secondary. We want to control that CSS variable. And we can do that with an inline style. So we'll just say style, and we'll paste that. Oops, we'll paste. I was hoping I was going to paste that. Okay, sorry guys. We'll paste that secondary, and then we'll set it equal to the background color, BG color. And let's save that. And now that should be the color I want. Awesome. So now they're all coral, which is pretty cool. So what we need to do is we need to go back to our app.svelte and and pass in some values. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the BG color value, and I'm just going to send a hex. So this will be a red color. So that should change it to red. We can see it's red, and then we'll do the same thing for green. And we'll do the same thing for blue. Next thing we need to do is we need to create variables that represent our color. So I'm going to create red, which is going to represent our red color. And I'm going to start that off at 100. I'm going to create blue, which will represent our blue color. And I'll start that at 100. And we'll do green, which I'm going to do 0. So that'll create a purple color. And we're going to bind that to color. So color equals red, then color equals blue, and then color equals oops, did that wrong. Color equals green because this is our green color, and then color equals blue. Okay, so that's cool, but I want you to notice something. So I'm going to output the red color right here. So you can see it's 100, but notice when I move the slider, that value doesn't change. And the reason is that the prop that we're passing in, we're not binding the value. So a really cool trick to get that to work is you can just append bind, and you can bind the prop, the value that you're passing to the value. So now when I change red and I save, keyword save, oops, cancel. Sorry, it should change. Oh, and this is a really good point too. Notice that by default we get these decimal points, which we do not want, and we also aren't seeing the cool little bubble that we saw in the example. So if we go back to the Svelte material UI, you can see there's this value called discrete, and what that'll do is it will make it 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, a whole number, and it will display the little bubbles. So if we go back to our slider component and we type in discrete, I can type that right, equals true, we save, we should now get the right thing. Okay, so now that's working. So that's pretty cool. The next thing we need to do is delete the H1 because we don't need it for that, and we need to create the div for the to display the color. So that's going to be your challenge. See if you can create a div under here that will display the color. You want to take up 10 columns and start at 2. So it's the same size as this, and it should be 200 pixels tall. So I'm going to let you do that, and it'll be your challenge. If you can't do it, do not fret. I will be doing it once I'm done. Okay, so all right, I hope you were able to do it. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a div. We're going to create the grid. So BP grid, and then we're going to create a div, and we want this div to be 10 wide, just like the sliders, and we want it to be offset at 2 so everything matches. And this is going to self-fold, but that's okay. We're going to give this a class of color display. But you can use whatever class name you want. You don't have to use mine. So then I'm going to do a style tag. This is where you put your styles in Svelte, and I'm going to move this down so we can see everything a little better. And I'm going to say color display, and I'm going to set that height to 200 pixels. And I think there's, so did I put a border on this? Probably should have if I didn't. It's okay. We'll see how it looks without a border, but you can add a border if you want. So now we want these values, the red, green, and blue, to control the color of this, and we can't see it. So let's add a style tag. And then inside the style, we'll say background color, and we're going to set that equal to RGB, and we're going to say red, green, and blue. See what that looks like. Okay, so we got our purple. It's looking good. I'm going to exit this. Okay, so now it's purple, but if I move it, hopefully, does it change? Let's make sure it's changing. Oh, it's not changing because we didn't bind the props. Okay, so now we have to bind all the props. So you probably caught that. So bind the props, and now it should change. Okay, that's awesome. So we're doing pretty good. I guess for this color control, I'm noticing that this is going up. I want to push it down a little bit. So I'm going to say color control, I'm going to say margin top equals 20 pixels. See what that does. Oh, color controls. Let's see. Okay. Now if I do this, yeah, that's way better. Okay, so we've got our color picker. The next challenge, let me just make sure, see where I'm at. Yes. Okay, yeah. So the next challenge is to display the div right here that will display the RGB value. So if you look at the original color picker, we have this little thing right here. Don't worry if you can't get the styles perfectly right, but see if you can get this outputting. So I'll leave that to you, and I'll pause the video. Okay, go. Cool. Okay, so let's get started. Hope you were able to do it. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a grid, and we're going to give that grid a class. We're going to create a div that's going to be a grid, so it's going to be BP grid, and we're going to give it a class of color numbers so that we can style both of them, because there'll be the RGB values and the hex values. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create another div, and there's going to be a BP. We're going to offset 2, and this is going to take up 5 columns, and this will display the RGB value. So we're going to type in RGB, and I'm going to do a break line. You can do it other ways if you want. And I'm going to say R equals red, G equals green, and B equals blue. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, looking good. We do need to style it though, because that does not look good. So let's do that. Okay, so let's go here, and we're going to say color numbers, and we're going to select the divs inside it, the divs directly inside of it. And we're going to say height equals 50 pixels. We're going to say border equals solid 1 pixel gray. Border radius is 2 pixels. Text align, which will center it. I'm going to say center. And justify content space around, and padding 5 pixels. And let's see if that works. Okay, that's looking good. I am noticing though that this is like right next to that, which I don't like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another class called another style called color numbers, but this will just style the whole grid. And I'm going to say margin top equals 20 pixels. So that'll push everything down. Oops, numbers, sorry. So that should push everything down. All right. So that does that. Our next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a helper folder, if I'm right, that will where we'll create a function called RGB to hex. And yeah, so let's do that. So we're going to create a folder called helpers, and we'll create a file called color helpers.js. And then I'm going to Google RGB to hex JavaScript. And if I go to the Stack Overflow post and I scroll, a whole bunch of answers, the one that I liked the most was it this one? Yes, it was. Okay. So we're going to copy this. I'll link to this answer. You're just going to copy that in. And this should change an RGB value to the hex form. And I'm going to say export. I'm going to save that. And yeah, you can read up on this and try it and all that good stuff. Okay, so now that we have that there, we're going to go back to our app.svelte, and we're going to import RGB to hex from our helpers/color helpers.js. Okay, so now we have access to this function, and I think there's a challenge after this. Yes, there is. Okay, see if you can do the other one, this one right here, where you use this RGB to hex function to output the hex value. So go ahead and see if you can do that, and I'll be back doing it. Okay, I'm back doing it. So yeah, just pause these videos. I don't know how to say that right. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create our hex part. And let me go back to this tab so we can see it. So we're gonna say BP offset, not offset, BP5. And then we're going to say hex. And then we're going to do a break line. And then we're going to have a variable called hex, but let's create that. And this is going to be a reactive variable. So I'm going to say hex color. And then we're just going to say RGB to hex. And then we're going to pass in the red, the green, and the blue. So now whenever one of these variables change, the hex color will change. So if this works, I should just be able to do hex color right here. See, and it's looking good. So if I change this, you can see the hex colors change, the RGB changes. We can make it more pink or purple. I don't know. I'm not a color expert, but you can see we've created a simple color picker. The one thing that I think this is missing is an H1 tag. So I'm going to do that. You don't have to do that, but I'm going to do that. It's not part of my notes, but I'm going to say div BP grid. And I am going to say div BP 10 offset 2. And I'm going to say H1 color picker. Okay, so that's looking good. Wonder what font that's using. I want to make sure it's using the Roboto font. Let's see, because I don't think we set that in our thing. So we can go to, where is it? Styles, font. Oh, maybe it is using the Roboto font. Okay, yeah, I think it is. So that's good. So now it's using the Roboto font, so we don't have to put that into our styles. So with all that being said, I think this is good. I think we're ready to upload this to GitHub. So let's do that. So I'm going to go to github.com/ my GitHub page, PHP Tuts. Go to your GitHub page. I'm going to now cancel out of this and clear it. Go to repositories and you go to new. And I'm going to say YT for YouTube, Svelte, color picker 1. So this will be part 1. I'm going to create the repository. And I'm going to, follow these instructions. A few edits. Git add dot, git commit, got color picker working. Do another clear, and I'm going to copy this URL. Please copy your own URL. And then I'm going to push to master. And then if you've watched my other videos, not that I have that many, but if you've watched my other videos, you'll remember that in this rollup.config at the very bottom, there's this thing, this GitHub pages that will publish to GitHub when I run npm run build. And the reason is that it's when I run npm run build, it's in production. So if I do npm run build, it should work. But before I do that, I just want to make sure that this uploaded. Okay, so now I'm going to do npm run build. And it's taking a little bit, so that probably means it's working. So, okay, it uploaded. So we're uploading to GitHub. And I wonder if this is going to work. Let's see. It's probably not ready. We'll just refresh until it is. Okay. So sometimes when it does this, you have to go to the end of the URL. And you have to type in index.html. Looks like there's an error. I bet there's an error. Okay, so this is a common mistake that I've made a ton of times when doing this. So go to public, index.html, and I bet you donuts to dollars that, yeah, we have these forward slashes that do not work with GitHub pages. So go there for the global CSS, delete that, forward slash, delete all these forward slashes, and we'll just use Visual Studio Code's git forgot to delete forward slashes. So save that, and then hopefully okay, there we go. So now we'll commit that and we'll push that up. And now we'll do a npm run build, and hopefully that works. Okay, so it looks like it's uploaded. Might take a second for it to start to compile. So I'm going to pause the video. Let's try one more time before I pause. Oh, there it goes. Okay, yeah, so this is a weird bug that I've noticed, that sometimes these things just don't align right. I'm going to file a bug for that. But the bottom line is we do have our color picker. It is working. It's using blueprint-css and material UI. Hope you had fun building this. In our next series, we'll be building the save part and using Svelte.js stores. I am going to get to a video on APIs. I want everyone to know that, and using APIs with Svelte, because that's a super important concept. But until next time, I'll catch you all later. Hope you all have a great day.